Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here today. On behalf of the Criminal Prosecution Society and CU Law in general, we're very excited about the presentation today. We're very excited to have Mr. Brauchler here. Mr. Brauchler is a CU Law alum from the class of '95. He's now the District Attorney for the 18th Judicial District, which covers Arapahoe, Douglas, Lincoln, and Elbert counties. So please help me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Through this door is horror. Through this door is blood, bullets, brains, and bodies. Through this door, one person came with a lifetime of hatred in their heart and a 2.5-month plan for murder in their mind. In the early morning hours of July, a few years ago, about 13 miles from where we sit right now, 400 people filed into a box-like theater to be entertained. And one person came there to slaughter them. This would normally be where the sound plays, and it's very dramatic. It's the gunshots.
Aurora 911, where's your emergency? Sir, I can't hear you. What address? Theater, Aurora, Colorado. Sir, I can't hear you. Give me the address again. There's gunshots. What address? Sir, give me your address. Say it loud.
The guy that came there to kill them that night, the guy who came there dressed in armor from head to toe to fingertips, armed with 4 weapons and over 700 rounds of ammunition. That guy's in the courtroom with us today. He's seated right over there. And on July 20th, 2012, he tried to murder a theater full of people to make himself feel better, and because he thought he would value himself more. And so began what is arguably the largest, most logistically challenging, most publicized and scrutinized trial that Colorado has ever had. And that's sort of what I want to talk to you about here. Before I talk to you about sort of how this case and I sort of got together and the things that we found through it, I want to talk to you a little bit about the background of it. The 18th Judicial District is where I'm the elected district attorney. And you already heard that it was Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln. But what I want to ask is, and I am not afraid to call on people because we are in a school, how many judicial districts do we have? Sir, do you know? Ma'am? Any idea? More than 18 is a great answer. It's got to be at least 18. Does anybody know the answer? 22 is the right answer. They're numbered in the order in which they came into existence, and last year would have been the 50th year that the 18th Judicial District existed. Does anybody know what the first Judicial District is? No? Pass. It is Jefferson County. How can that be? Why isn't it Denver? Isn't that what you would think? Denver, got to be. That is exactly right. Golden was. It was the seat of government out here as we were carving up the state of Colorado. So they're first, Denver second. 18th is Arapahoe. We have 22 total. Now, this is a unique jurisdiction in a lot of different ways. And this is how the state is sort of cut up. We're the Broncos orange right there on the 18th. Now, by square mileage, we are bigger than the state of Connecticut. By population, we would be the 47th most populous state in the country. It's over 962,000 people, and if you believe the state demographer, next year we'll go over 1 million. To put that in perspective, that is 45% more populous than Denver. When we go over 1 million, we will become the 35th jurisdiction in the United States to have at least 1 million people in it, and that makes it unique. Arapahoe County itself has 615,000 people in it, and it is the most diverse county in Colorado, more so than Denver. The population of, for blacks and African Americans, highest in Arapahoe County of any county in the state of Colorado. Same for Asians, and I think we're fourth in terms of Latino and Hispanic. It is the only county in the metro area, it's the county in the metro area with the highest percentage of females in it. It is the only jurisdiction, and not just Arapahoe County, but the 18th, it's the only jurisdiction that has an active duty military installation, Buckley Air Force Base, a prison, the Lyman Correctional Facility, and the Broncos training facility, which is kind of cool, especially this week. And that's right across the parking lot from the courthouse. Now, the biggest city in this jurisdiction, and the third largest in the state of Colorado, is Aurora, Colorado. 345,000 people. That's big. To put that in perspective, that's probably 10 grand or so within striking distance of the entire population of all of Boulder. It's big. It's mostly suburban. It's been called the safest large city in Colorado by the FBI, and these are folks that know. It's also been called by them the 16th safest large city in the United States, and for reasons we discussed before, it is the most diverse city in the state of Colorado, and that's where this crime occurs. They have a significant law enforcement presence there. Now, even though it overlaps with the county sheriff, law enforcement is done border to border, north, east, south, and west in Aurora by the Aurora Police Department, where they have 600 sworn peace officers, plus 100 civilians. And so that you can kind of picture it too, 88% of the population of Aurora is in Arapahoe County. The other 12% is in Adams County, north of Colfax, if you know that area. Our office, in terms of what did we have resource-wise as we head into this case, we have 82 prosecutors. That's the most in the state. Probably one or two more than Denver and El Paso County. We have 225 total staff members, including 17 sworn peace officers, 2 of which play a role in this. And we have an annual budget of somewhere around $20 million. Now, despite the fact that we're the biggest DA's office for the biggest jurisdiction, that is not the biggest budget in the state of Colorado. The biggest budgets in the state of Colorado are owned by Denver and Jefferson County. So, July 20th, 2012, my guess is it didn't matter if you were in Colorado or not, you couldn't escape the news of this horrible thing that took place out at the Century 16 Theater. And if you've never been out in that area, it is roughly Alameda and 225, very close to these major roads in and out of Aurora. There were 12 murder victims. And we'll talk about why that's actually a low number for what was attempted here and what could have been pulled off here. The one that got me the most was little Veronica up here in the upper left. She's 6. He shot her 4 times with that assault rifle. To understand sort of how we approached the case and what we did, I want to talk to you a bit about the size of the case. I hit a funny button over here. That's the best slide. Now you don't get it.
It'll come back. It's going wonky on me, sorry.
Is it a clap-on thing, or?
I can try to put it on the side. That might help.
Hey, boom, there it is. We'll just let me know what's that up there. Huge case. Law enforcement-wise, we dealt with 13 local law enforcement agencies. A lot of them were mutual aid, things that took place at the scene. We also got support from them after the fact. 4 federal agencies. And I'll tell you, I'm not someone that normally sings the praises of the involvement of the federal government in anything that we do, but I will tell you that these folks, particularly the FBI, really paid huge dividends for us, and the relationship we developed with them, I think, is going to be the model for these things moving forward, even though I hope there's never another one of these again. We also had to deal with some out-of-state agencies, California in particular, where the shooter was from, Texas for some other reasons, and then some foreign countries. The former girlfriend of the shooter was from India, and she traveled back there, and we had to negotiate with some foreign governments to get some things done as well. Now, discovery, how many people here, by the way, are either lawyers or in law school? Okay, so for those of you that are not, discovery It's all the documents, all the everything that prosecution has to turn over to the defense when you accuse someone of a crime. We don't do it like the feds. The feds give some information and they keep a lot of information. We give everything. There isn't really anything we ever hold back. And in this case, it was voluminous. It was 94,000 plus pages of discovery. There were an additional 388 CDs of information, 3+ terabytes total of data. We identified through the discovery all the reports and everything that were generated, chain of custody witnesses, the whole thing, about 4,041 potential witnesses in this case. That's a lot. There's nothing I've ever done that's even close. Our response was to provide 5 prosecutors for this case, and I was one of them. And I'll tell you, if I didn't get on this case, we would have been outgunned by the public defender's office, who had 5 public defenders on their side of the case. This is our team, and I'll talk about each one of these people here. And they did a fantastic job. I'll give you a little pick-me-up slide, too, about why you want to have so many people. And that's because share victory, share defeat. We had 2 investigators, and I say semi-full-time because, and the reason we went with 5 prosecutors is important too. In the past, these kinds of cases, what I'd found, and in our office, by the way, we'll talk about this in a minute too, has the only death row inmates in Colorado came out of cases that were prosecuted before I ever got to that office. The people that were assigned to those cases were stuck with those cases, and that was all they did for years and years and years, and that's a huge resource suck, and it also kills them too. So I decided we would try to add as many people as made sense to add, where it was still logistically manageable, but where people still did their jobs. I did not want to hire anybody just to do this job, and I didn't want to put them on this case in such a way that that's the rest of their career. They're just fighting the appellate battles on this case. So we had 2 investigators, 2 of the best guys in the world, one of whom has since retired, and they worked on this case for us while they did their other investigative jobs, and then once we got underway in trial, they became full-time designated for our case. We had a full-time paralegal. The case got continued a couple times from trial settings, not by us. And the last time it got continued, the paralegal on the case came into my office and said, I quit. I got to tell you, I don't cry easily, but that was close, because this is a woman who'd been on the case since the day it happened. She knew every paper clip in that case, and now she was saying, peace out, I'm gone. And she took apparently a much better job working for the good folks at Comcast. So that tells you a little bit about this case. So we ended up finding another paralegal in our office who I had done a couple trials with since I was in office. And so she knew what my particular neuroses were, and she was fantastic. She never quibbled about it, took this thing on, hit the ground running full speed, and became fantastic as support. By the time we got to trial, what we realized is I can't just have a paralegal that can manage all the discovery outside the courtroom and get things done while we're in court. I need someone in the courtroom to work this, to make sure this works, to interact with the judges, tech people. And so we had to get a second paralegal from within the office. I didn't hire him special for it, that sat in the court for those months that we were in trial. We had 4 full-time victim advocates. They were grant funded. That's important because it doesn't come out of our operating budget. Is it tax money? Sure it is. But the federal government stepped in and provided a $1.3, $1.4 million grant just for victims. And remember, he murdered 12. He tried to murder. We accused him of 72 others, but we could have charged, and we talked about it, every single human being in that theater. There were 400 of them. He put bullets through the wall into another theater full of 400 people. Under the law, we might have charged them all as attempt murder victims. That didn't make any sense logistically. We'd still be in trial if that were the case. So what we ended up doing was decide to treat them as attempt murder victims for purposes of our Constitution, which is very strong for victims, and our statutes, which are equally supportive. But we ended up charging the 12 and the 72. So why 4? There were 1,158 victims. Let me tell you how they broke down. Both those theaters we talked about, the family members of the deceased, and for reasons that must seem obvious to you, we went broad on that, okay? Brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, grandparents, anyone that we could arguably fit under that umbrella title for the purposes of providing them information and services. For the deceased, that added up to about 100 people. I had contact with those people a bunch before, during, and since, frankly, after the trial. Also, the parents of the juvenile victims count. And the part that gets forgotten a lot about this case is the apartment, the booby-trapped apartment. Do you guys remember that? We'll talk in detail about that. But that part gets forgotten a lot. But all of the people in that apartment complex were arguably potential victims had the explosives and the incendiary devices gone off the way they were supposed to. We treated them as victims. So June 26, 2012. Look, I had gotten back from Iraq in October of 2011 and said, I'm going to run for district attorney. There were already 3 other people on just the Republican side running for this office. And it was a heck of a slog. By June 26th, I had won the primary and became the nominee. This case didn't exist. Those issues that I was running on were completely different issues from this. And on July 20th, I woke up in the middle of the night, like I'm wont to do, and I checked my phone like I do, and I saw Facebook and Twitter hits for praying for the people from Aurora. So sad. I got up, went downstairs, turned on the TV, and saw what would end up being the next 3 years of my life, and maybe even more. And that changed the complexion of the campaign quite a bit. So this was something I inherited by virtue of having already become this candidate and then the nominee for district attorney. I knew right away that this was potentially a death penalty case, and one of the things I want to talk to you about, and I've talked to the community about all over, anyone that'll have me come out and talk, is this process of deciding to seek death on a case like this or any case, and I've never had to make that decision before. One time in the Army, I was asked to do what's the equivalent of a preliminary hearing on a case that the command wanted to take capital, wanted to take death out in Hawaii, but the general ended up deciding not to do it. That's as close as I've come to capital punishment work. So, for me as a prosecutor, the single biggest question on any case is, what is justice? Not what's the most I can achieve, not what's the least I can get. What is justice? And what counsels me on that and limits me are not only the laws, but some precedent, and then all the other information I can take in. So for those of you that aren't attorneys, or if you're attorneys, you're not criminal practitioners in the state, I want to talk you through some of the things that are just true about how America and Colorado treats criminal justice matters. For instance, we have different penalties based on the quantity of something related to your crime. So if someone steals $50, we treat that far differently than someone who steals $1 million, and that just makes sense. We do the same thing with drugs. Someone that possesses a gram versus someone that possesses a pound. We treat those things as quantitatively different. Same thing with injury. If someone gets punched in the eye at a bar, we would call that a misdemeanor, third-degree assault. But if that same punch broke the orbital bone or a nose, we now call it a second-class felony. A fourth-class felony of second-degree assault that's punishable by prison. So just that little change. And death we treat differently as well. The victim makes a difference. Most of us here, and I'm getting close, but most of us here, we're just your average victim. But if someone's at risk, if they're over a certain age, if they're under a certain age, if the person that is offending against them is in a position of trust, if the person is law enforcement, a judge, a juror, all of those things change the penalties that are available for, someone that commits a crime. We also look at their criminal history, but we also look at whether or not specifically this was a repeated act. We do the same thing with DUIs. We now have a habitual DUI statute. We have habitual offender for people that commit felonies over and over and over again. And we have different penalties for different sexual assault type things. If you possess child pornography once versus twice, again, the quantity of the pornography matters as well. So this is sort of a backdrop of just the framework of our system. Now, first-degree murder in the state of Colorado, and that's what we're talking about here, requires that someone act with intent and after deliberation. This isn't some heat of passion, quick, negligent thing. It's not like that. It requires much more. This is the biggest charge you can get in the state of Colorado, and it's punishable by life without the possibility of parole. One person, murders one other person, and that's life in prison without parole. So the other things that I have to consider, the state of Colorado says, okay, we'll have a death penalty, but the prosecutor just doesn't get to decide, I want the death penalty whenever I think it's appropriate. It has to fit certain aggravators. There are 17 of them under the law. The ones that were applicable here, in my opinion, the ones that we pleaded, that we went to the jury with, were based on the number of victims. If you kill 2 or more people in the same criminal episode, that's an aggravator. That could potentially make that case a death penalty case. If it was the product of ambush, and we pled that it was, the way he conducted this particular murder, whether or not the method of killing someone was particularly heinous or torturous, whether or not your act created a grave, and I don't mean you know that, a grave risk of death to others, that's an aggravator. And finally, if someone is murdered who is under the age of 12, that too is a potential aggravator. Now that's just 5 of the 17 that are out there, but these are the 5 that we thought fit. All of this stuff exists before I become the district attorney. All of these things are there for me to come to and deal with. But there's also the history of the death penalty recently in Colorado. We have the Nathan Dunlap case. Do you guys, and I'm mostly talking to the younger folks, do you guys know what that Nathan Dunlap case is? Is there anyone that doesn't? There's no shame in saying that you don't. That is shameful. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. So, in a nutshell, in 1993, a former employee of a Chuck E. Cheese in Aurora, and he's fired, and it kind of pisses him off. He makes the decision to go back, and he's going to rob and kill the workers in that Chuck E. Cheese. He goes there early. He sits down. He orders his favorite meal. I think it was a cheese and ham sandwich. And he sits around and he scopes the place out to see who is working there that night. Some he recognizes, some he doesn't. He goes and he hides himself in the bathroom. And when the place is cleared out of patrons, he gets himself psyched up in the mirror, says, you can do this, you can do this. He walks out and he systematically shoots each of the people working there in the head, including a young woman who saw him coming. And by the way, this isn't me telling you all these things. This is me telling you the words he spoke to Paula Woodward after he was convicted. Paula Woodward was a longtime investigative reporter out here at 9 News. And said he saw her and he was amazed that she didn't run away. And Paula says, well, what would you do if he'd run away? Or if she'd run away? And he said, well, I'd have shot her. He said, well, what did you do, Nathan? He says, she was standing there shaking her head saying, no. How'd that make you feel, Nathan? That pissed me off because she was making me feel bad for what I was about to do. Well, what'd you do, Nathan? I shot her in the top of the head and I moved on. And he would go on to murder 2 other people. He would have killed a 5th, but he shot a man in the head in the kitchen who had the audacity to live, and when he left, he ran outside and ran away. The last person he murdered was a mother of 2 young girls who was working for the very first time that night, all by herself as the new manager. He walked in and he shot her, but it was an imperfect shot. She fell, and he would describe her as struggling to breathe. He could see she was in pain, and he felt like he needed to put her out of her misery. So he walked up and shot her in the head again, and then he cleaned out the safe, went home, and bragged to his friends about what he'd done. That case went to trial in 1996. The venue was changed to El Paso County. That jury deliberated, came back, and found him guilty and sentenced him to death. That case progressed through more appellate review than any case in the history of the state of Colorado until it came back like 2 months after I got sworn in, when the U.S. Supreme Court said, that's it, no more appellate stuff. He's had more due process than the Constitution requires, and they sent it back for imposition of the sentence. That was hanging out there when I had to make this decision. Sir Mario Owens and Robert Ray, who doesn't know that one? Okay, there was a guy named Robert Ray who was facing a trial for murder, the murder of a guy named Eric Van. These guys were gang guys too, and they were intimidating witnesses into not testifying against Robert Ray. One of those witnesses was a guy named Javad Marshall Fields. Javad was a CSU student, and he was on the cusp of graduating. He would not be intimidated. His mother, by the way, now is Representative Rhonda Fields out of Aurora, great lady. And he would not be intimidated, and he was going to testify. So Robert Ray gets together with Samario Owens and gets Samario Owens to agree to assassinate him. And so while they're driving home, and they, I mean Javad Marshall Fields and his fiancée, also a CSU grad, Vivian Wolf, they're ambushed by Samario Owens, and he shoots them to death in the car in order for Robert Ray to avoid first-degree murder on Eric Vann. That case is tried in the mid-2000s. Both of them went to trial, and they were both convicted and sentenced to death. And those cases are still hanging out in kind of that post-conviction appellate world where, given the state of the law, who knows when those are going to get resolved. Those things were hanging out there. Now, in between, there had been a number of death penalty cases, all of which got overturned by a case called Ring versus Arizona. But this is what exists at the time. So I talk with the victims. And as you might guess, out of those 100 family members, there's no unanimity on what to have happen. It's split. And there are some people that say, George, I want you to seek the death penalty and I want him to die. There are some that say, as a matter of conscience, as a matter of principle, I could never support the death penalty, even when it's my son, even when it's my daughter, as a matter of faith. And then in between, there was just an interesting number of responses. Some that would say, George, I want you to dismiss the case because the minute he's released, I know he'll be taken care of. Well, how do you value that? What is that, a vote for life or death? There are people that would say, I want you to plead this out and send him to prison because I think he'll be murdered in prison more quickly than the system will ever put him to death. How do you value that? Is that a vote for life? Is that a vote for death? And then there were other people that would say, George, I'd be with you. I would. But it looks like it's going to take 15 or 20 years for this to actually happen. I can't do that to my family. I can't do that to my family. Others that would say, we support you on death, and after the governor granted a reprieve to Nathan Dunlap, and that's a completely different topic, they would call me back and say, hey, look, I was willing to sign up for 15 years of this with you, but if some governor down the road can simply decide they disagree with the jury and upend this, I want out right now. And then the worst ones, the hardest ones, were the jurors who said, we trust you. We trust you to make the right decision. That's hard. That's the worst. I'd rather have someone say, here's the way I feel, and you're a bastard if you don't do what I say. I can live with that. But the I trust you part is hard. And so we had it all out of those hundreds. There were even a couple that wouldn't talk to us. I also, I talked to my wife about it. I talked to our local priest about it. You can imagine, if any of you are Catholic, the priest's response was exactly what you think it would be, and that is, the church does not endorse the death penalty, and we think that everybody should have the maximum amount of time at redemption. I said, I know, I get it. I said, let me just tell you a little bit about the case. We stood there in kind of the foyer of the church, and about 15 or 20 minutes later, he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, man, you almost have me convinced. He's like, but the church's position is no death penalty. I said, okay, all right, I got it, thank you. So I met with the public defender's office, invited them in. And this happens in every capital case, potential capital case. Come in, do a pitch for me for mitigation. Explain to me why you think that this guy should be treated like someone who murders one other person. Because that's what they're asking for, right? That's what life without parole is. Treat him like he'd only killed one person. So they came in and they did their pitch, and it was some mental health stuff, but it was very cursory and just slight. There just wasn't enough detail in there. So I met with them, and I said, okay, listen, honest to God, I'm open-minded about this. If this stuff is going to turn out to be something like you say it is, here's what I need from you. I want his notebook. That's the notebook that he wrote in that came into evidence. I want every mental health record ever on this guy. And he'd had some prior treatment, that he'd gone and seen some different counselors and stuff. And I want my psychiatrist, someone that I pick, to go in there and do a forensic exam. And if all of that stuff bears out what you're telling me in here, you're going to have a pretty willing ear on this. I'm extremely open-minded to this. And they said, no. You're going to have to fight us in court for all of those things. And through the course of motions and trial, I got the notebook because they pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. I didn't get my own doc, but I got 2 independent court-picked docs to go take a look under the hood and kick the tires on the mental health issue, and I got every mental health record that ever could have been used in this particular case. I ended up having to make the decision, and the judge said, look, I'm going to set the hearing for April 1st. That's so weird that he'd pick April Fool's Day, and it was right after Easter, which is so weird, just the timing of it given the issue. So on April 1st, I had to stand up and say, it is my determination and my intention to seek the death for this guy, that it's justice for him. And so we started to gear up for this trial. Now, this trial commenced 30 months after the massacre. That's a blistering pace. That is a blistering pace for any capital case, let alone one with this many victims and this much logistical stuff going on. There was a case that was going on at the same time that happened right about the same time as ours and went to trial about 2 months before, a case named Ari Liggett. That name mean nothing to you. This is a guy that drugged his mother and then cut her up into little pieces and put her in Tupperware and drove around town until he got contacted by the police. He claimed to be insane also. And he had 2 separate evaluations, and it was the 2 evaluations, not the capital, that made it go long. And their trial was, they went 28 months from crime until trial. We went 30 on a death penalty case. That's pretty quick. The entire thing started January 20th with jury selection and ended on August 7th with the jury coming back with their determination on sentencing. Jury selection, like nothing I've ever heard of before. 9,000 juror summonses went out. That's a record, I think, in the country. 7,000 actually went to good addresses. That means 2,000 came back as bad addresses. That should concern you as taxpayers, because we got those addresses from the DMV, okay? So I don't know what they're doing there, but there's a lot of people who haven't updated their addresses. Of those 7,000, 3,800 came in. There was a morning session and an afternoon session for weeks to fill out a 20-page juror questionnaire. Of that 3,800, about 2,000 were scheduled to come in, 6 in the morning, 6 in the afternoon, to do individual voir dire. From that group, and I don't think we did all 2,000, we culled it down to about 115. When we got to 115-ish, the judge said, let's stop, let's bring them back, and we'll do general group voir dire to a room almost like this big, filled. And we ended up with 12 primary jurors and 12 alternate jurors. They never knew until the bitter end whether they were a primary or alternate, but we knew the moment they sat down who they were, and that kind of impacts how you decide who to excuse and all that. 50 days total for jury selection. Ridiculous. 65 days from opening statement until the final closing argument, which was on August 6th. 115 court days total, 306 witnesses, over 2,700 total exhibits. Our case was 222 witnesses in the guilt phase from April 28th to June 19th. The longest witness was a guy named Dr. William Reed. He was one of the court-appointed psychiatrists. He was the one that had the video. How many people watched any part of this case on YouTube or TV or something? He was on a long time because he did 23-ish hours of videotaped psychiatric examination. And I had said in opening, I promise you'll see every second. I sort of regretted that at about hour 17, but nonetheless, I wanted to live up to my word. So he was on 6 days. The most witnesses we ever got on a single day was 18. We had 2,400 individual exhibits. The bulk of those came out of the theater and the car. We had 13 sentencing witnesses in the sentencing phase, 47 exhibits. The defense case was much smaller for obvious reasons. They had 36 total witnesses in the guilt phase, 58 exhibits. They had 229 exhibits in the sentencing phase, 34 witnesses. And this talks a little bit about preparation. Some of the lessons learned in this as we get into the facts. And another pick-me-up slide there. I've lived by this. It could be the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others. You must see that all the time. Publicity. By the time I got on board, this case had been around the world several times. There are 2 ethical rules that apply here, 3.6 and 3.8. Now, if you're not in the trial game or you're not a prosecutor or defense attorney, you don't know what these rules are. But these rules talk about pretrial publicity in a way that's unfair to one of the parties and special responsibilities of the prosecutor. This was a big deal. We did not want to try this case in the press, and the judge came down with a pretty strong enforcement of that through something everyone called a gag order. 3.6 is about an extrajudicial statement. You don't need to know this. If this was just a law school crowd, I'd go through this in greater detail. One of the things that we want to do is do anything that can cause a substantial likelihood of prejudice against the defendant. And we have to make sure the cops don't either. So that seems like it should be easy, right? You reach out to your law enforcement agencies, you say, nobody talk to the press. Nobody say anything. It should be that easy. But limelight is very attractive, even to the police. Does anyone know who this is? This is the New York City Police Commissioner at the time, Raymond Kelly. And on the day, you can see it up there, on July 20th, 2012, that day, he is quoted as saying that this guy called himself the Joker after being arrested. There's a lot of things wrong with that. One is, that is not true. That never happened. How many people heard this guy colored his hair because he was the Joker? And he said, never, ever happened. Not only did he never say it, he adamantly denied it every time he was asked. That's one problem. The second problem is, how does the New York City Police Commissioner know a damn thing about this case out of Aurora? The third thing wrong with it is, if you knew something, why are you talking to the press in New York about a case in Aurora? And it's because there's this attraction to the limelight. So there was a motion for sanctions for that and a couple other things that took place, none of which was ever the product of the DA's office. We won all those motions. Thankfully now we can just focus on the trial at hand. But wait, nope, the public defenders want to go to the Supreme Court to get a subpoena enforced to bring Jana Winters from Fox, New York, back out here to answer questions under oath. As you might guess, the First Amendment has a little something to say about that, and that got struck down. But we were dealing with this for months, this issue of these leaks. So my advice is, if you ever get in this position, protect your case, protect yourself, because expendability matters, even in criminal justice. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Ensign Ricky are beaming down to the planet. Guess who's not coming back? That's right, it's Ensign Ricky. So here's the first test. Be proactive. Make sure you reach out to everyone that has any information, and make sure you funnel it all back into your office. This was the first lesson learned. Internet and social media are king in these cases. Tons of investigative leads, and we got gold off of this. This guy had an adult friend finder posting where he changed his banner, if that's the right word. Will you visit me in prison, from July 5th, 2012, 15 days before he started pulling the trigger on these innocent people. And that was the actual copy of it. He also describes himself in this thing. All the things we found on the internet and social media bore out the fact that this guy was completely grounded in reality, knew exactly what he was doing. Here's the pictures he posts in advance. Interesting thing about the hair color. People ask, why did he do it? Why did he do it? I've had people speculate that, well, maybe it was because he was thinking about trying to get away. I don't think that was it. There was another guy that was part of his little clique, and this guy was really socially stunted. He did not have the ability. He couldn't have done this. He couldn't have talked with you face to face and couldn't have done it. There was whatever's wrong with him mentally impacted that ability to personally interact. But he had this group of friends that he hung out with. One was the ultimate ex-girlfriend, and another was a buddy of hers who he lost in the breakup. That guy changes his color of his hair to red, not too far off of this, a couple weeks before this guy does it. I don't know if that means he's doing it because of that, but it was interesting timing. He submits this pic to Match.com. He's signing up for all of these adult websites, dating websites. He's a tremendously lonely guy, and he thinks, by the way, that he's had his only girlfriend ever in his life that broke up with him. It's his only sexual episode ever in his life was with that girl that dumped him. So he's submitting all these pictures to these adult dating sites. And we got them all because quickly we moved in to get the feds and the locals to start searching all the social media. He was a big, I don't know what these letters mean before this case, but he was a big multiplayer something game guy, and that was something else we got into. So when you approach this case, you know that the most likely defense to mass murder isn't going to be self-defense. It's not going to be terrorism, not in this case. It's not going to be intoxication. It was none of those things. It was insanity, right? That's the only play that this guy ever had, and it's the only play you ever see in these cases. So mental health became the name of the game. And in this particular case, the defense and even some of the state psychiatrists wanted to push the issue that he had schizo something, fill in the blank. How many people here have ever gone through the Diagnostic Statistical Manual? Anybody? I hadn't before this case. Limited stuff on other trials. It's a thick book, okay? And we're on the DSM edition 5 right now. That's important because the DSM-1, which was just called the DSM at the time, no one ever calls it 1, was out 50, 60 years ago. And at that time, there were, I think, 40 to 60 diagnosable mental maladies. DSM-5 has over 400. We are continuing to redefine thought and behavior to make it something diagnosable under this. And there are multiple different terms that come up with schizo as the first part of it. So for insanity, just to bring you up to speed on what I had to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt, and you should know this, Colorado not only has the hardest death penalty statute in the country, it has the hardest sanity statute in the country. Both of those things came to play in this case. So for instance, at the federal level, if you were to say, I'm insane, I can't be held accountable, that person has an obligation to meet a certain threshold of evidence before the prosecution has to respond. In Colorado, that standard is so low that if you say, I'm insane, with even a scintilla of evidence, the burden now shifts completely to the prosecution to disprove that beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a huge hurdle. And so in Colorado, what insanity basically means is that at the time of the commission of the crime, that someone had to suffer from a disease or mental defect. I think we're just going to keep flickering with this. At the time, that made them incapable of distinguishing right from wrong as measured by a societal standard of morality. It can't be your own personal view of that. It doesn't refer to that. Moral relativism doesn't count. You can't say, well, I think killing people is good, and therefore that's my moral standard. It doesn't work like that. Prevented them from forming the culpable mental state. That's that after deliberation with intent part. It can't be moral depravity, moral obliquity. Sorry to zip through these, but I want to make sure I get you to the other facts. Every text, email, chat, all of those things made a difference for us. So we find every single email that we think he's generated through his CU. He was a health sciences student there because he was a grad student in the neurosciences program. Every email that he had since he got into the program from about July through this event. All of his Gmail. He also had a Hotmail account. We got all those emails. So in this particular case, we had his August, you can't see it. This kind of sets the framework, if you could see it. He's writing to his dad. His name's Robert, but they call him Bobo. And mom is Goober. And it's a weird relationship, folks. I mean, they don't communicate very much live. Maybe a phone call a month or something. Most of it is through text and email, even though this is the first time he's really lived a great distance from home. This kind of sets the framework for where he's at. In August of 2011, he's asking for money. He's talking about searching for a place to live after next year when he has a successful year in school. That's Goober, his mom. They're talking about weather. They're talking about natural events. This is an important one. This is an email from Friday, September 23rd, where he is proactively reaching out to the girl that he would ultimately date. And he says, hey girl, I lost my number. Can I have yours? That's important because one of the things that the defense wants to push is he's so socially stigmatized he could never initiate a relationship like that. And yet here he is doing it. So we go through October. It's all the same stuff. And by the time we start working our way through November and he's talking now to his girlfriend, he gets onto GChat. They talk about really interesting stuff. I guess if you're a scientist, you're just a little off. I don't know if there's a scientist out here, forgive me. But they talk about weird stuff. They talk about like naming rats in the lab like Lucifer, and did you have to kill Lucifer today, stuff like that. D. Sherlock B is his email. Sherlock is because his last name is Holmes. D and B are just bookend letters. He liked the way that looked. Talks to his mom about Thanksgiving, hangs out with his girlfriend, things getting fixed. I'm so sorry you're missing this, but want to go on a date. Things start to change for him in February, all right? What you need to know is that in this program, over the course of a year, If you're going to get accepted into the PhD program for neuroscience, and that's how this guy defines himself, is by his ability to get through school. That's all he's got. He doesn't have any long-term friends. He doesn't have any real intimate relationships. Even his relationship with his parents is just different than I imagine yours is with your folks. He's got school. He's got the future. He wants to be a scientist. To get the PhD in that first year, he's got 3 lab rotations with different labs. At the end of that first year, those lab professors have to, in essence, agree to marry him for 6 or 7 years. You come work in my lab for 6 to 7 years, and that's how you get to be a PhD. By the way, Dad's a PhD. The first lab is with a professor named Occam Klug. That one doesn't go that well. He doesn't get great vibes by it, but he thinks maybe that's his fallback. The second lab, which ends sometime in February, that professor comes right out and says, don't even bother. Don't even bother coming back because I'm not going to take you. He's down to his last third potential lab. Things just aren't going well for him. Sure enough, he goes through Valentine's Day, does this candlelight thing. You can't see any of that. There it is. His email to his dad, February 23rd. Looks like I won't be joining the past lab I rotated in. I didn't complete the main project. The professor got peeved. And then he says he also, that his girlfriend broke up with him. So it hasn't been the best of times. This then really starts this progress towards this ultimate massacre. We go through the rest of the emails to show that he never has trouble communicating. It never changes. There's never a sense that he loses the ability to put sentences together, words, ideas. It's all constant and consistent throughout this period of time. The big Gmail chat, the big G chat of importance is the one from March 25th. Sorry that you can't see. Here it is. He's talking to her. She says, hey, what are you going to do now? They broke up, but they still sort of stayed in contact for a little while. And he says, what I want to do, I can't really do. He says, I can't do it, and if you could see it up there, you would say, in his words, there it is, because it's evil. Think about how important that term is. He chose the term evil. And one of the things that factors into sanity is an inability to distinguish right from wrong. He clearly knows it is. He says, so I can't do that. And she keeps pestering, what is it? What do you want to do? What is so crazy? And he writes back, kill people, of course. And she thinks it's more of this theoretical, weird scientist banter. And she says, killing people's too much effort. You're just going to get yourself locked up. Most people aren't worth it. And he writes back, that's why you kill many people. And it goes on from there. He begins going through these other emails, and what you can't see is he's asking his dad about his IRA, he's filing his taxes, he's getting in-state residency, and he's already starting down the road of thinking, how is he going to address this? He's great in writing. He's got great grades. When he submits something in writing, this dude's top of his class. When he has to talk or present, dude struggles, can't do it. The labs he's failing in them because he can't interact and he can't exercise any initiative. So at this point, he starts to feel out his dad and his mom. Hey, things aren't working out well here. I don't know what I'm going to do. Dad writes back on May 1st, Jimbo, you should try to stay in school. Job market's pretty tough right now. And in 2012, that was true. School would be a good option. He's now pursuing a new girl. That's a big deal because the defense wanted to say guy was really slipping into the crazy right now. He was cutting himself off from everybody he knew. That's a sign of schizophrenia. He's reaching out to, I'm not kidding when I say this, like the hottest girl in neuroscience. I don't know what that standard is, but she met it, right? She was the hottest girl in neuroscience and really very gregarious and engaging. I mean, she testified in court. She was very good. And he's pursuing her, asking her out. We should go on a hike. We should do these other things. That's interesting because, and May is important, you can't see it, because on May 10th, and we corroborate this from searches on his computer as well as the actual purchase, he purchases 2 tear gas canisters. 2 tear gas canisters and a gas mask. Think about that. Almost 2.5 months before this massacre, he purchases something that can really only be used inside. He knows exactly what he's thinking of doing even 2.5 months before. And here's the clear out that you can't see that he ended up using. There's the gas mask. There's the filter. By the way, if you could see the picture, and it's awesome, you would see that there's also an earbud that's kind of outside of it. One of the other things he did was to put earbuds in and blast techno music on a new iPod so that he wouldn't have to hear. the consequences of what he was doing inside that theater because he knew it was bad and he knew it was wrong. He also tried to purchase over the internet the first Glock handgun he would try to get. He tried to purchase over the internet from a licensed firearms dealer. Couldn't get it done. The guy was sticking to the rules and saying, look, I can ship it to these kinds of places. I can't just ship it to your home. Here's the stuff I have to do. So he abandons that, and he ends up having to go to stores to physically buy those guns. One of the questions people have asked afterwards is, look, what could we have done to change the law so that this guy couldn't have gotten guns? I don't know, because he went and bought them all in person and stood there and waited for every single background check. He had no criminal history. There was nothing that would have prevented him from possessing or owning a firearm. He followed the law. And if someone said, well, what if he had a waiting period? Folks, he'd been planning this for 2.5 months. Waiting period wasn't going to do a thing for this guy. So he continues, by the way, as he's planning now the death of many people, he continues to live this lie. He's emailing his parents, talking about, well, struggles with the third lab rotation. It's not going well. He starts to reach out to that first lab to see if he can join them. Remember, he's got to have someone marry him. That professor writes back and says, hey, James, I've got to admit, I've got some concerns. Uh-oh. So he's got those first two gone, and now he's dancing around with the third professor, and it doesn't look like that's going to work out. It gets to be June 7th, and he has to do some prelims to qualify for the next year. He does poorly. And part he does poorly because he can't present, and part he does poorly because he really hasn't been preparing. He's been preparing for murder, for mass murder. And he goes in there and he does so badly, the professors say, dude, we want to schedule some time for you to come in and retake these things. He's not going to have any of it. So instead he goes in and he drops out of school. Won't tell his folks yet. In fact, 2 days after he drops out of school, actually it's the day he drops out of school, you can't see it. He emails his dad and says, not much news here, not much going on. He's keeping it secret from him. He talks about the weather with his mom, start talking about all the different things going on in his life. He says, I don't want to move back home, only as a last resort to homelessness. He had to live at home for the year in between undergrad and grad because he didn't get picked up for a grad program, and it was awful. He says, his dad says, why don't you apply for unemployment? And like every other crazy person out there, he applies for unemployment, filling out completely accurate information. Unemployment turns him down, and he lets his dad know. Nothing else new going on here. By this time, he's made half of the purchases he's going to make towards this mass murderer as he continues to let his parents know that nothing is going on. No fires here. You can't see it. He's talking to his mom. There's no fires or smoke in Denver and Aurora. He continues to purchase things, fireworks, professional fireworks things. And then we get into his text to remember the girl from neuroscience he starts pursuing at the end? He reaches out to her, and she writes back, who the hell is this? He says, it's Jimmy James from Neuro. It doesn't sound, by the way, like a guy who's socially stunted, and that's the weird thing. In writing, in text, in G-chats, he's like a normal guy. He actually has a little bit of charisma, but in person, he couldn't look you in the eye. He couldn't have a conversation with you. So here, he's different on this text, and he's pursuing her. Delacqua was the second professor who shot him down. They keep going through all this other stuff. He says, hey, he doesn't want me to come back. He didn't like me. He's talking crap about him. He likes to hear himself talk. And they keep going on and on as he pursues her, asks her to go out on a date, hiking. They talk about studying. He talks about not doing well on the prelims. It's now June 7th. And then he says, look, I don't think I did well. I think I'm dropping out of the program. She says, really? She says, are you being serious? And the crazy guy says, I'm being James, smiley face. So what does that mean about prelims? I'm quitting. Fave red. She had red hair. She was his favorite. Still have a couple months on the Colorado apartment lease, so I'm not going to break that. That's important because he's deceiving her too. It's July 8th. It's 12 days before he'll try to murder 400 people. And he's telling her, I don't really have any plans other than to live out my lease. There's the notebook. You guys, has anybody ever seen this up close, like looked at it online or something like that and seen the pages? I'll zip through this, but if you get the chance, take a look at this, okay? This guy chooses the theater, the Cinemark Theater, after going through a series of things. He says, could I do nuclear or biological attack on people? And he goes through an analysis. No, too difficult to pull off, too regulated, too suspicious. He then says, well, could I get a cell phone stun gun? And it's a cell phone that's actually a stun gun, and a folding knife, and kill people on trails, on federal hiking trails. I could do that. But he rejects that idea because he says, too slow, not enough kills, too much evidence, and too personal. That's not crazy, okay? That's evil. But guess what he has on him when he's arrested at the back of the Century 16 theaters on July 20th? Cell phone stun gun and a folding knife. So he talks about I left out too. He says the airport. He thinks mass murder. I could do mass murder. Why? What about the airport? He rejects it after analyzing that there's too much security, it'd be too difficult, and people would take the wrong message from it. It has too much of a connection to terrorism. Who goes through a thought process like that? It's not a crazy person. It's an evil person. Over the course of 2 months, he sits in 9 separate theaters in the Century 16 theater because he wants to figure out which are the best ones. And he pays cash, by the way. We can't find any credit card expenses, always cash. That's the Century 16, by the way. And he draws it in his book, a schematic. Yep, pretty good too, by the way. Why this place? More visible, reduced visibility here, these different possible buildings that he can hide by. He starts going through each of the theaters, and they're numbered 1 through 16, I suppose. And look at what he says about them. He says, don't go to theater number 1, avoid it. There are too many exits. Another one he says, he puts 3 stars by theater 10. Primary target, only 2 exits. Excellent spatial approach. Most moviegoers take the right path. Double doors. He likes the double doors because as we get through this, we'll see he says, you know what I could do? I could get handcuffs, and I could lock the double doors, which would keep people from getting out and would allow me to kill more people. Only 2 exits. The ones he doesn't like have too many exits, too visible. This is the analysis he's going through for his evil. How about that? Starting point is more conspicuous than others. He's thinking about being detected. If this guy didn't know right from wrong, why is he thinking about people trying to stop him or to get away from what he's going to do? Too many escapees, he writes. Pros, cons. We talked about those handcuffs. Let me get you here to another magic fact. There's the double doors can be locked, increasing casualties. He also tells Dr. Reed that. Guess what he has on him when he's captured behind the theater on July 20th? Handcuffs. He'd ordered 2 pair. Another pair were still back at the apartment. So he says start at theater number 10 or theater number 9. And guess what? He starts at theater number 9. Interestingly, that notebook, it's mailed, if you'll recall, to the CU psychiatrist he'd been seeing through the mental health program that they have there. And you know the stamps he chose to mail it to her? 4 of the greatest scientists ever. The failed science student used those stamps to mail her his notebook. So my advice is for these cases, you got to have a forensic psychiatrist. I wish the defense had done that, but they didn't, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He goes online, he looks up how to make bombs. This is the apartment part. He puts in his notebook, hey, here's the wild card. I'm going to have my apartment blow up. I'm going to use explosives. They're the least suspicious to get. I'll use gasoline and oil. I'll acquire a remote detonation system. And remember, the purpose of the apartment is not to inflict death or injuries. It is to be a diversion. It's to suck law enforcement and first responders to his apartment, which is 4.5 miles away from the theater, so that he can kill more and potentially get away. So here's his apartment. And I got to tell you, this guy's so wicked smart. He puts together something that the best bomb techs on the planet Earth couldn't figure out. The FBI guys, the guys they send to Benghazi, the guys they send to all the explosives around the world at the embassies, those guys were out here at Aurora. And they're standing in that cherry picker outside that window, if you remember that image, looking in, and they're saying, I don't know what the hell's going on. This guy had set up in the middle of the room a little device that just flickered lights, alternated lights. It was connected to nothing, but they didn't know. They looked at these wires, and they're like, what in the heck is going on there? How could this have ever possibly worked? And what is it? What does that mean that it would work? How do we turn it off? They didn't know. At one point, they got together and decided if we can't get this guy to tell us what's going on in there and how to defuse it, we're going to recommend burning the building down. Think about that. But they do go back to him, and they sit down with him, and this is, by the way, the same day he's arrested. And the guy who's out of his mind, delusional and crazy, sits down and talks them through everything in the apartment. He's proud of what he's done. It's recorded, by the way, and it got played in trial. In fact, at one point, they ask him, what is this thing? In a picture they show him. And he's like, you guys don't know what that is? And he's shocked that they don't know what he's done. Here's what he's done. Here's how this apartment's going to work. His front door is unlocked. The door opens, and it's dark, except there's some lights around a TV monitor, and there's like red or blue in the corner over there, but it's so dimly lit. There's a like piano wire, fishing wire, that runs high to low across the opening. Once you step inside, not opening the door, stepping in through that doorway. Stepping into that doorway, if we could see that picture, the wire, which would be up here, is connected to a thermos that used to be by that pan in the lower right. Inside the thermos is something called glycerin. Inside the pan is something called potassium permanganate. When they connect, instant chemical reaction, flash fire. That carpet is soaked in gasoline and oil. These little Wile E. Coyote-looking bombs, those are actually professional firework things. I don't know what they call them, but they're like those little Russian dolls where you keep taking the head off and there's a smaller doll in there. Inside is another smaller one of those. The interior one is gunpowder. The exterior one is filled with gasoline. Some of them are, I think 2 or 3 of them are empty. The rest are all filled like that. Now the fusing goes from the floor and the pan up to these jars. Let me see if I have a better picture of the jar here. What do I do with that thing? Maybe it's this that's just shutting it down. That jar right there, there's 3 of them, and the fuses go to them. This jar at the bottom, those are bullets, loose bullets stuck in there. What they're sitting in, what they're basting in is napalm. Now, you can't go buy napalm. I mean, not in America, I think. You have to make it, and he made it in his kitchen out of styrofoam and gasoline. Above that are more bullets and black smokeless gunpowder that he jammed in there. But wait, it gets better. That black bowl that you can sort of see in the top with another fuse sticking in it, and these are quick fuses. There's different speed fuses. I didn't know this before this case. These are quick ones. That black bowl is filled with something called thermite. Thermite burns at an extremely high temperature, and if ignited, it drops down into that jar and we're off to the races. Guess what? You can't buy thermite at Home Depot. You can make thermite. One of the key components of thermite is rust. This guy made his own rust in his kitchen while he was making napalm to put this together. That's not crazy. That's just evil genius stuff that he's put together. And there's 3 of these jars with fuses that go to each one. But wait, there's more. So, can't count necessarily on someone just coming to the door. I'm trying to get to this. Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that too. This is another angle of it. I left out this. These green bottles down here are filled with gasoline also. And he'll later tell the bomb guys that he picked the green bottles because you can't see that it's gasoline in there because the green obscures the yellow. It's just amazing stuff. More views of the different bombs that he had set up. Okay, so this thing right up here is on the fridge. This is a professional fireworks remote detonation system that has fusing that runs down and goes into that morass of that other stuff. How is he going to get someone to come to the front door? Well, about 25 minutes after he leaves his apartment, he has made a recording and set up his computer so that 25 minutes later, it comes on and blasts techno music. And it's going to summon someone, maybe someone who makes a noise complaint, maybe it'll be the police, maybe it'll be a neighbor. And they're going to open that door and start the chain reaction. But he can't count on that. So he uses this system. And this thing has a remote that connects, that goes off to it. How is he going to get someone to trigger this box? About 3 days before this event, he goes to Best Buy, and we have a picture of him buying it. He buys a remote control car. He buys a boom box. And he comes back to the apartment and sets up the boom box to blast music 40 minutes after he leaves his apartment. And someone will come to this bag that he has set down by the corner of his apartment by a dumpster, and that music will blast, and they'll look inside, and they'll see a remote control car with a remote on top of it. And if they tried to pick that up and play with the car, tick, 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 boom, they detonate the apartment. That's redundancy, okay? That's not insane. That's evil. There's the soda bottles comment about them being green, you can't see it. And then that's the other thing. Gasoline smells. He don't want people to know that there's gasoline in there, so he buys cajillions of these Renuzits and, the little tree things you hang in your cab when you're driving around, or Uber now, and puts them all along the doorway and along the carpet so no one can smell them, so that it's not conspicuous. Now, this piece, too, tells you this guy's playing evil chess, not checkers. He takes magnesium. He goes to a place called the Science Company or a science store, and he buys magnesium, and he breaks it up into little chips, and he spreads it out all over the carpet that's going to catch on fire. Does anyone here know anything about fire and magnesium? Tell me, what do you think is significant about that? Oh my gosh, that's it, right? When it catches on fire, you can't put out magnesium with water. So this guy's thinking, someone's going to try to put out my fire, and they're probably going to bring water, and I don't want that to happen. So he puts something that gets worse with water all over his carpet. He's playing evil criminal chess. We had the FBI involved here on this, and I'll get to, by the way, why didn't the apartment explode? Does anybody want to know that? We'll get to that at the end. That's kind of a big one, right? Everything's different with the feds. They have their own nomenclature, they have their own reports, and none of it makes any sense to regular human beings. I mean, it's not that it's not helpful, it's just bizarro world. One of the things you want to do is you want to have a liaison with them. Ask for their best special agent, and we got him. His name's Jeremy Phelps, and he was with us the whole time. Here's another solid the FBI did. They said, what can we do for you? We'll do anything we can for you. This is the biggest crime ever. We'd like to help you. We said, okay, how about a model of the theater? And they're like, we can do it. And they come up with this thing. This thing is to scale. It had walls on it, but because it was so big and heavy, you had to move it around, so we had the walls taken off. At one point, one of the detectives dropped it and broke some of the chairs in the front. And we were like, oh, damn it, well, we got to get that fixed. And they said, we'll fly someone out from D.C. I said, wait. My kids have model glue all over the house. I can bring them out, I can knock this thing out in 10 minutes. And they're like, absolutely not. So one day, we kept it by my office. I'm walking to my office, and there's a guy there with the glasses and like the jeweler's monocle thing, and he's got the little measuring things, and it's like surgery in there. I'm like, what are we doing to get this model up and running? But this turned out to be helpful. Those little silver dots were placed on there as we went through evidence, bullet holes and things that were in the chairs to highlight that for the jury. And that's the model being used there. Right there, that's Ashley Mosier. She's the mom who had her daughter taken from her by this guy. This still, to me, is the most emotional part of the case, and that is this young single mom at the time. She gets two 13-year-old babysitters to watch her 6-year-old while she goes to get an ultrasound to confirm her pregnancy and how far along she is. It's less than a trimester, but it's close. And she comes back, and she's with her significant other, and they want to celebrate. So they do kind of a little pizza thing, and the kids are all excited, and they're like, what should we do? And the two 13-year-old girls are like, hey, let's go see the Batman movie. Now, Ashley later on says, when I heard Batman, I was thinking of something cartoony, family. I wasn't thinking about, I hadn't seen these other movies. And it's the midnight showing, but it's the summer. There's no school, right? So she goes, and they go to the theater, and she walks in, right? And she has Ashley sitting on her lap, and she says, Ashley had a really bony butt, and it was just kind of painful to have her press up against me. So she picks her up and sets her in the chair next to her. And the words we couldn't get out in trial because the judge thought that they were too unfairly prejudicial was she turns to her, and the last word she says to her, you can sit by yourself. You're a big girl now. And it was minutes into the movie that this guy shot her 4 times with that assault rifle and killed her. And I've got Ashley up here talking us through where she was and what she tried to do, and he paralyzes her too. Not only did she have a miscarriage, but for a time she's paralyzed. She's a quadriplegic. Now she's a paraplegic and has decent use of her arms. But man, I got to tell you, there were times talking to her before and during the trial, there's just nothing there. You know how there are people that when you talk to them, they got life in them. There's just something about their eyes, and she didn't have that. She just It was empty, It was tough, man. And I had to ask her these stupid questions because we asked everybody at sentencing, like, how has this impacted you? What a dumb question. And she says, I don't know who I am anymore. She says, I've been a mom since I was 18. I don't know who I am anymore. That was it. I was losing it even in trial. I can't talk about it without thinking about her. Anyway, so look, we had to carve up this case. This is tough. 5 people. And they do a dividing up of this case based on some skills. So this is Lisa Teach McGuire. Lisa Teach McGuire is the national expert on victims' rights and victims in general, especially now on mass murder cases. She's the best. I only had to pay for her out of my budget for the trial because that federal grant covered her too, and that was huge. But she was never supposed to be part of the trial team. She was supposed to be under the grant and just help communicate with victims, and she swallowed so much pain from them. She'd have her phone next to the bed, and she'd get calls 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, people threatening suicide, people crying, people drunk, people high, talking about their loved ones or whatever, going through all sorts of things. And she would try to get them help and talk them off the ledge. And then I kept expecting her to crack. I kept expecting her to just lose her mind, and she never did. And then as we got closer to trial and we started to divide up who's going to do all these victims, I thought, wait a minute, for 2 years, they've known Lisa. They've talked to me over the phone and in person 3 times. They've known Lisa like every day for 2 years. Let's bring her on the case. The federal people and the Division of Criminal Justice of the state said, we're not going to pay for her if you put her on the trial. I said, that's okay, I'll pay for her. So we took her off the grant and brought her in, and I thought she was great. She did a lot of great work. So then there's Jacob Edson. Jacob is our quiet warrior. Jacob is my chief of the economic crimes unit. This guy knows paper, okay? He's economic crimes. There aren't a lot of shows like Law and Order, white collar stuff. I mean, it's not, it's so boring, but he's very good at it. He's very smart. And we put him in charge of all of the transactions, the computers, and all the out-of-state witnesses, and he was great at it. In fact, we could have had to go get subpoenas and out-of-state subpoenas and perfect them and get people brought in. He was so good at working with these people. And you can imagine, the companies that this kill suit was purchased from and these weapons, they're not anxious to come to a televised trial and say, yes, that's my product he wore as he's murdering people. So he convinced all but one of these out-of-state witnesses to come on their own. I mean, that's huge. That really paid off. And he would do things like he would get in all this stuff, all the purchases. There's the 12-gauge shotgun that he bought, 6 rounds in there. He also got us our computer stuff. Now, there are those that say, in fact, the defense argued this. They said, here's proof he's crazy. As soon as he was done killing, he walked outside and just gave himself up. Nonsense, okay? He planned for a potential escape. Not only does he protect himself head to toe, and by the way, did you know that he took a Vicodin 1 hour before he left his apartment because he thought the police might get rough with him when they took him into custody if he got captured and he didn't want to feel any pain? That's how far down the road he's thinking. So he gets online, we find this on his computer, and he is searching for tire puncture devices, and he comes up with these things. They're called caltrops or something. But they're these little road stars that no matter how you throw them and land, they have a spike that sticks up. And when the psychiatrist asks him, what do you got that for? And they're in his front seat, by the way. He says, oh, that's in case I got into a chase with the police. Well, why would you get in a chase with the police if you're just going to give yourself up? It's because that wasn't his plan. These are pictures of him at the store going through the AR-15 purchase thing. That's him right there on the right. There's the AR-15 that they find right outside the door. He purchases all this level 3 ACH armor stuff, and I'm an Army guy, and I don't even know what all those terms mean. This is him going into, I can't remember if it was Bass Pro or Gander Mountain. These are some of the armor things that he'd researched and ends up purchasing. This clip is a picnic table clip that you might use when you put your picnic table cloth over. You don't want the wind to blow it away. He manipulates it, wraps it up in sort of a light green tape so it has more grip. And this door, this is the back door to the theater. And he has already been in there, and he knows the right width to have it. He's going to put it there so it keeps this self-locking door. It's not an emergency exit. It's just you go outside, there's no handle. There's no way to get back in. It's over. He's going to slide it there. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is him at, I think, the FedEx store, picking up thousands of rounds of ammunition. I think every round of ammunition he purchased and had delivered to him in the mail. Boxes and boxes of rounds. This is him coolly, calmly waiting for a background check while he's picking up one of the guns. There's the magnesium he searched for, black powder, potassium permanganate, the maximum sound limit in public, because remember his sound. This is him leaving Best Buy. He's got the red hair already. He's got his boom box in his remote control car. That was all Jacob. Then we got Karen Pearson. Karen's veteran prosecutor, DU product. Lisa Teach McGuire, by the way, CU product, so, better. Karen's great. And Karen has prosecuted a lot of high-profile cases, and she knows her way around evidence. So we stuck her with the thankless task of the theater and the car. Thousands of pieces of evidence to get in. And if you watch this part of the trial, jurors later would say, I wanted to stab myself in the face. I mean, it was so painful for her to go through. And this is exhibit, this was another bullet fragment pulled out of the chair in row 4, seat 5. I mean, it went on. It was like boring bingo for hours. But she got it all. And these are some of the things that she got. These are some of the magazines that were abandoned. This up here is a 100-round drum. That was actually one of the right there. And then these are the 40-round magazines. You can't buy them anymore in the state of Colorado. Let's talk about that. Someone has said, wasn't that a difference maker? If he'd only had the 20-round magazines that are permissible, wouldn't that have made a difference in this case? No, folks. He brought 700 rounds of ammunition with him. All he would have had is twice as many magazines. That magazine limit was going to do nothing for this guy. He was set on murdering a lot of people. And this is him. This is the out the doorway. Some more magazines that he abandons. This is the FBI schematic showing the rounds where they were fired from and where they went into in theater number 9. These are different markers that show where some of the rounds went that Karen had to get in. These rods are the trajectory rods. There were so many bullets fired, so many rounds. The FBI guys ran out of rods. They've never run out of rods before. So they had to go to other agencies and get other rods. This is the wall that separates theater number 9 from theater number 8. And there's a bunch of rounds that go through there. The reason they go through there, as the psychiatrists find out, is they ask him, well, what's all this about? And he says, well, I was shooting at people as they tried to flee because I couldn't just have everybody run away. Think about that. Those rounds that he purchased, especially for the AR-15 style assault rifle, they were called steel penetrator rounds. They weren't like it wasn't good enough to have an assault rifle that fired regular 5.56 millimeter rounds. Does anyone know anything about rifles and stuff? Okay, so the round for this kind of assault rifle is like a NATO equivalent 5.56 millimeter round. That's long, but it's thin, it's small. It's a .223 caliber, very small, but a lot of gunpowder, so it goes super fast. To add to that, he gets steel penetrator rounds. Now, he doesn't ever get asked this question by the psychiatrist, but I think I know the answer. Why does he need steel penetrator rounds? Because he's been in these theaters, and he's played it out in his head. And where are people going to go when he starts shooting at them? They're going to go behind those seats, and he needs to get through those seats. But he shoots through the walls, right, in an attempt to get people that are fleeing. And the rounds go through into theater number 8. And it is just by the grace of God that people don't get killed there. We get injured people, including a woman who's sitting way up here. See where that round is, way over there? All the way across a packed theater of people, and she gets hit in the face with the bullet. Lives. 7 surgeries later, she's as good as you're going to be after being shot in the face. But think about how miraculous that is, that it didn't go through someone's head on the way over there. And these are the rods that are sticking through into that theater where they went to. So he goes outside, and this gives up thing, remember when he goes outside for the first time, he must realize it didn't work. My diversion didn't work because there's a cop over here moving towards him. There's a cop over here and a cop car over here with the red and blue rockers going. And he says, I went outside, and there's victims, by the way, everywhere, blood and people running around everywhere. He says, I go outside, and I did an assessment. And I realized I can't get away. I can't drive with all this upper body armor on. And I'm not going to have time to take it off. And I don't want to get in a shootout with the police because I don't want to get hurt. So with his door open, he takes his handgun and he sets it on the top of the car and he just waits. And he has to wait there really only for seconds as the officer down here is moving towards him and says, I see a SWAT guy behind the movie theater. And he's standing there by the car. And then it occurs to me, he can't be a SWAT guy because SWAT guys don't stand around anywhere. They are constantly going. And oh, by the way, that's not our helmet. That's not our gas mask. That's not our armor. And so he draws on him and orders him to give up. And the guy, more than happy to do it because he didn't want to get hurt, didn't want to feel any pain. So they take him to the ground, and then they arrest him. Rich Orman was really my right-hand man. Everybody's got to have Rich in the office. This guy has an enthusiasm for the law. I don't know how else to describe it. Anything that comes in the door that I don't understand, I go, get me Rich. Bring Rich. And Rich will figure it out. And in this trial, he tackled the apartment. And when I say law stuff, I mean, be candid about what my strengths are. It isn't the law part, okay? So it starts off with trial where everyone's, and I'm not mocking Judge Samore. I have nothing, he's the best judge I've ever been in front of, and I've been in front of federal judges, local judges, best ever. No, not even close. But he's from another country, and he has an accent, and I'm probably not going to do a good job of it, but I'm trying to explain how it went in court. So when there would be a question of law early on in the trial, he would say, Miss Brady, Mr. Brauchler, would you please approach? And then I'd get up there and I'd go, can I go ask Rich? And so then about halfway through the trial, he would be like, Mr. Brauchler or Mr. Orman, could you approach? By the end of the trial, it would just be, Mr. Orman, could you approach? And I'd be like, I get it. I understand. I'm not, all right. Rich was phenomenal. Could not, look, I couldn't have done this trial without any of these people, but Rich has since been someone that I have put into the position of being in charge of the entire appellate unit, based in part upon my experience with him on this case. And then there's me. I had, of course the picture's not up there. This is not a joke when I tell you that we did divide up the case, and I missed that day that we were doing it in the office. And when I came back, I said, well, what are we doing? And they started going through the things, and they're like, and you get mental health and all the people from CU. And I'm like, wait, so like the entire crux of the case, I mean, that's it, right? I mean, nobody's contesting he bought guns. Nobody's contesting he booby-trapped his apartment. The only thing that people are contesting is the part I get, and they're like, all right. I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out. Oh, yeah, that was it right there. So I got mental health and CU. I had done some stuff with mental health before this, but I've never had to swallow so much information that is so beyond me. I wish I'd have paid attention more in undergrad and in high school on stuff. But I'm learning this mental health stuff because I've got to cross-examine these experts, one of whom is, no joke, a world-class researcher in the area of schizophrenia. She turned out, in my opinion, to be substandard and not up to this case, but that's not her fault. She was asked to do it, and she agreed. So this is me cross-examining a guy named Jonathan Woodcock. The defense in this case, remember, I don't get to pick experts to show up here. I get the two experts that the court found, Jeff Metzner and William Reed. I don't get to even have input on them. They just happen. But the defense gets to handpick experts. And they pick a guy named Jonathan Woodcock, who is a CU Health Sciences guy now. He wasn't at the time. And he's an Alzheimer's specialist. But interestingly, they ask him to come and meet with the mass murderer 4 days after it happens in jail. And we'll talk a little bit about how that went. But he did not perform well at all in court. They had these three experts, Woodcock, Hanlon, and Gurr. They all shared some things in common. They were all handpicked by the defense. And remember, I don't handpick anybody. These were things that were going to matter to the jurors. Not a single one of them was certified as forensic in their field. Now, does anyone know what forensic means? When I say forensic, what that means? Look, there's the science part of it, and there's a law part of it. And when those two things have to come together, that's forensic. And here's why it matters. That whole big DSM-5 with the 400-plus diagnoses in it, there's no diagnosis for insane. There's no diagnosis for inability to tell right from wrong, good from evil. And all. There's none of that. That's a legal construct that has to somehow get this information to cross into it. And you have to have people who are really experts in the legal part of this and the psychiatric part. And they brought three people to this trial who weren't qualified as forensic experts at all. They had, and you'd see this if it were up there, each of them had also only ever testified for the defense. Think about that. If you're going to put on evidence, do you want to put on someone who has only ever testified for one side? Do you think I would have wanted to have a psychiatrist that's only ever testified for the prosecution? Not a chance. And what you find out is Jeff Metzner and William Reed, who have both been experts many times, have testified more for the defense than the prosecution. Do you think that a jury appreciates that when they're the ones testifying? Absolutely right. That's fair. So we've got 3 experts that had never testified for anyone but the defense. They each admitted under cross-examination to changing their normal practice to suit the requests of the public defenders who hired them. Think about how damning that is. Jonathan Woodcock, and these were slides that I ultimately used in closing to help reaffirm what I think the jurors already knew by the time we were done, and that is, this guy is not insane. It wasn't even a close call. It wasn't a close call for Jeff Metzner. It wasn't a close call for William Reed. Never board certified in forensic psychiatry. He's never even been court appointed. He's only been hired by the defense and the public defenders. Never worked for the prosecution. He's only exclusively worked for criminal defendants, including the exact same defense attorney who was representing our mass murderer. At one point, he testifies he'd been qualified as an expert hundreds of times. Well, remember, I have researched the heck out of this guy's background. I know more about him than he'd ever want me to know. I know where he's testified as an expert. And by the end of the cross-examination, he amended his answer to say, well, actually, I've been qualified as an expert tens of times. That's a little bit of a credibility killer. It was the only curriculum vitae, that's like his resume, that the defense never offered into evidence because it was so thin and so, completely inappropriate. 4 days later, he meets with them. He sees this guy when he's unmedicated. So if this guy's going to show signs of being insane, man, you'd think it would be right now, right? 4 days after he's pulled the trigger all these times. Well, he allows the defense attorney to put an investigator in the room with him, totally against their normal rules, but he does it anyway. Not only is he present, he coughs and jokes and actually gives an answer to the defendant at one point. He's not allowed to ask the shooter about the crime. He's not allowed to ask him about the booby trapping of his apartment. He's not told there's even a notebook, which they know about already. And afterwards, the jail psychiatrist says, I want to get this guy medicated. Can you call me back and let me know what medication to put him on? And he doesn't call him back. Do you know why? Because Woodcock calls the public defenders and say, what should I do? And they said, don't call him back. So they keep him unmedicated in jail for months. So, in my opinion, so he can have this reaction in November, which he ultimately has. He only meets with them for 2 hours and 45 minutes. At one point he says, yep, he was catatonic. And under cross he agrees through a series of questions that, yes, this guy was catatonic except for riding his bike to school every single day, attending his labs every single day, turning in all of his assignments on time, strong grades on written work. He'd go shopping. He paid all of his rents and bills on time. He worked out regularly. And so I asked, did he ultimately fit his catatonia in over lunch? And the doctor goes, yes. Hanlon suffered from some similar things. He'd never been any of those things that you'd want to see out of a fair and impartial expert. This was another good part. When he's asked by the defense, they're trying to take the sting out of the fact that he's only ever testified for the defense. They said, tell us about your breakdown of testifying for the prosecution or the defense. He goes, almost exclusively for the defense. Well, remember, I've got all of his prior testimony. And I go through, and by the time we get done with it, I said, doctor, would it be fair to scratch out the word almost and just say, you've testified exclusively for criminal defendants? And he goes, yes. That's just a painful credibility killer right out of the gate. He didn't interview the parents of this shooter, and he wanted to. And under cross-examination, he ultimately admits that he thought it was important to do it, but he didn't do it, even though it was his normal practice, because the defense attorneys told him not to, and that he'd capitulated to them. His word, capitulated. Credibility killer. And then we had Dr. Gurr, who, no joke, world-class researcher in schizophrenia. At one point, and again, this is part of the luck of being in trial, I was going to ask her, hey, have you ever been, board certified in forensic psychiatry? I had just taken it for granted that she was board certified in psychiatry, just regular psychiatry. My goodness. So I started asking her this question, and I said, doctor, can I, and she's nodding. And I go, you look like you know what I'm going to ask you. And she goes, I do. I said, what was I going to ask you? She said, you were going to ask me if I'm board certified in psychiatry. And I said, no, I wasn't going to ask that, but what's the answer? And she goes, nope. I go, not in psychiatry? She goes, no. I said, not in forensic psychiatry. She says, nope. I said, have you ever been board certified in anything fill in the blank? And she goes, nope. I look over at the defense, audibly, by the way. One of them turns to the other, to Dan King, and is pulling on his sleeve, and he goes, it's true. She's never been certified. That was loud enough, I think, to be on the video. So that's a problem when all the other people that the court brought on board were board certified in forensic psychiatry. She's never worked for the prosecution. By the way, she's someone who's she's provided work product on behalf of the Unabomber. Jared Loeffner, remember Jared Loeffner goes down to Arizona and shoots Gabby Giffords, and some other high-profile people. They bring her out for the big guns, and here's what's happened. The feds get involved as the prosecution. She generates a report. They look at the report, and they cave in, and they plead out the case. That's happened in every case except this one. This was the first time she'd ever been made to testify before a jury. Best guess, last time she'll ever be asked to testify before a jury. She didn't interview the parents either, even though she thought it was important to do so and it was her normal practice. And in fact, she'd written 2 books where she said, it's important to talk to the parents. She says because their calendars didn't line up. She wasn't able to meet with the parents until 23 months after her first contact with the defendant while we were in jury selection. Oh, 2 months before jury selection. And she didn't video record it, even though, according to her books and prior testimony, she's delighted when it gets video recorded. These are just different changes in their practice. She spent 13 and a half hours to generate 12 whole pages of notes before rendering a 14-page opinion. The reason that's significant is the 2 state-picked psychiatrists generated reports that were somewhere between 60 and 100 pages and spent 23 to 25 hours with them. So this is our trial prep room. This was just a picture someone took without obviously asking, because there's all this ridiculous movement going on. This was our war room at the DA's office. We had a lot of them, a lot of meetings to discuss progress, witness order, even through the trial. And of course, this is good for meetings. None of us is as dumb as all of us. Over-endorse, impact matters, stay flexible. The strategic placement of victims, look, you got to think like this. And so I knew that the last witness I would ever have at the guilt phase was going to be Ashley Mosier. She's just the most impactful witness. You'd be foolish to burn her early. And I mean, and what we discovered is this, that there's so much trauma in this case that if you tried to do all the victims up front, you'd burn out the jurors, right? They would become numb to this. So right after about the second day, I think we'd already had too much. I made the decision, we're going to change it up. We're going to do some victims, then we're going to do some car, some theater, some CU, some apartment, and then we're going to come back to some victims. And we'll do some victims, and we'll keep doing it that way. And it allowed, I think, everyone, including the jurors, to stay with it and not build up that defense, that sort of callous to it. There was some strangeness in this trial. There were groupies for this guy, homies, they called themselves. They'd even colored their hair, and sometimes they would come to trial. There were conspiracy theories about what happened, and some people would reach out to the victims who they identified through things that came out in the media. They'd reach out to these family members and tell them, your daughter's still alive, your son's still alive. This is a big government conspiracy, that someone had given certain drugs to this guy to make him do this, that he was part of some CIA project. If there was a crazy-ass thing to think about, it got put out there in the email to one of these victims. By the way, this was important. This is his jail cell at the Arapahoe County Justice Center at the sheriff's office. During the sentencing phase, Mom gets up and puts up all these pictures that she was taking him to jail the couple times they went, or sending him. Pictures of Zuby the dog from his youth so that he'd always remember his youth. Pictures of Mom and Dad. But you know what he posts on his wall? These. Pictures of these women, and I'm going to say ostensibly these women. These could have been mailed to him from some 300-pound, 45-year-old man who's like, dude, check it out, I dig you. I don't know. But this is what gets his attention, are the ladies. This is what he's proud of. This is what he wants to look at. It's right across from his bunk every day. There isn't a single picture of Zuby, a single picture of Mom and Dad. There was an issue that came up, cameras in the courtroom. You guys, if you saw this, this was kind of a unique thing. You know, for Oklahoma City bombing, federal court, they don't allow cameras in the courtroom. They hate that stuff. The victims, most of them, the vast majority of them said, we don't want cameras in the courtroom. So we objected on their behalf. And the judge said, no, I'm going to do it. I think the public should have access to, and I get that. The public should have access to the trial. We're not going to ever show a juror, and we can block out things if there's, child victim or someone that testifies, we can do that. So they put the stationary camera up in the corner of the courtroom that he had control of to turn it off and on. I think it's the future. That's what I think. I would love to think that in the future, with the exception of some rare cases, that you could go home or get on your laptop and click on there and say, I wonder what's going on in courtroom 201 in Arapahoe County, or what's going on in Division E in Boulder. Is there a Division E? I just made that up. Division E in Boulder. Whatever it is, you know what I'm talking about. And watch judges, watch defense attorneys, watch taxpayer-funded prosecutors do their work. That is important, and I think this case went a long way towards showing how you can make it effective. We also had to monitor social media throughout the trial. Let me tell you something kind of cool that happened about 3 times in the trial. Rich Orman, the smart guy next to me, Bulldog, he was checking Twitter constantly and Facebook and stuff. And every once in a while, on some of these feeds on the trial, someone would ask, what does it mean that they did this? So Rich would be like, and I'd get up and ask a clarifying question. About 3 times that happened. It was pretty good. We got a sense, at least from those people, of how the evidence was being received. So, and I'm happy, by the way, to stay here and answer any and every question about this. But I want to leave you with something that struck me about this case that I talked about in the trial that I think is important. There are 4 things that took place that night that I can only describe as providential. If you're given to faith, this is the intervention of God. If you're not, you think it's luck and coincidence. But there are 4 things that kept this giant massacre from becoming much, much bigger as he intended it to be. Remember, he researches Columbine before he goes out. He knows the record's 13. He knows it. He says he researched it for response time from police. I don't even think that's actually online. But he does know that he wants to be the #1 mass murderer ever. So here's the 4 things. A second-guessing neighbor. Do you remember the apartment? And you're wondering, why the hell didn't that thing blow up? It seemed pretty good. Well, the music goes off. Boom. Super loud. He's on the 3rd floor. Below him on the 2nd floor is a woman who's in bed with her significant other, Captain Chivalrous. And she turns to Captain Chivalrous and she elbows him and she's like, can you hear? Go upstairs. And he says, yeah, it doesn't bug me. You do it. Good guy. So she waits and waits and waits. She can't take it anymore. She gets up. She goes upstairs. She goes to the door. She knocks on the door. No answer. She kicks the door. No answer. She grabs for the door handle, which is unlocked, and she stops. And she stops because in her mind, she remembers. Either, I can't remember if it was a story she saw or read or heard about, but something where in another setting, a neighbor had responded to a noise complaint, opened the door to their neighbor's apartment, and their neighbor had killed themselves in the living room. And she did not want to have that image in her head. So she lets go of the door handle, goes back downstairs, and calls Aurora PD to complain about the noise. That's providential act number 1. Oh, by the way, the remote control car down at the corner of the building, I guess what he hadn't planned on was a drunk coming along and just picking it all up and leaving with it. And that's what happened. So never tried to make it work. Fumbled tear gas. Now, if you look at this theater, you guys have all been to movie theaters, and he'd scoped them out. There's going to be an exit to his back. He's got that covered. There's an exit way up in the upper right, uphill, at the end of a narrow stairway. Not a good exit point for anyone. There's also the 2 side ones, the ones where you go to get the popcorn or whatever, that have the little lights over them. Those 2 exits. He gets those 2 tear gas canisters. He throws one over here, I think to cause pandemonium and to try to close off that exit. But he never gets a chance to throw the second one, because as he's getting out of that car, after he gets dressed, into his kill suit and all that body armor, he drops it, he fumbles it, and it rolls under the car. He spends a few seconds looking for it, but he can't find it. He's saying, screw it, I'm going. Had he been able to get that second one, I think we see increased casualties, because he wasn't able to close off that particular exit. Something to talk about, though, when he gets there, he parks in the back behind that door. He's already got on his ballistic pants, and he's got other pants on top of him. He doesn't have on the body armor yet, because it's obvious. And he's got on this hat, and I wish I had the picture to show you. He walks all the way around that theater that I showed you a picture of, goes in the front with everybody else. He's got his Fandango ticket thing on his phone. And he goes up and he shows it to the guy, and the guy takes him to the machine, and he buzzes in, and all these people are around him. I mean, it's packed, right? And he goes to the concession area, and we have video of him standing there, just hanging out in the concession area. You can almost hear him saying to himself in his head, don't look anxious. Don't look obvious. But he's standing around these people getting drinks and popcorn and candy, and he's got to know that he's going to end up murdering some or all of these people in the near future. And he waits, and when he feels like he's waited long enough, he walks off camera towards theater number 9 and disappears. And what we know happens is he goes down to the front row and takes that corner seat, the one closest to that exit. And he sits and he waits for the place to get packed, and packed it gets. And he goes through the process of it getting dark, the trailers start up, and he pretends to get a phone call on his cell phone so that he can look inconspicuous as he steps out the door. So no one will think twice about it, and no one does. And he gets up, and he goes out, and he takes out that clip, and he slides it over the door to keep it open, and he goes out into the car and gets dressed in that outfit. He hears a noise when he's out there. Turns out it's someone taking the trash out to the dumpsters that are right by where he parked. And one of the psychiatrists said, and by the way, he's got a sunshade up over his, he tinted his windows, and he has a sunshade up over the windshield so that no one can see in. And one of the psychiatrists asked him, what would you have done if someone had come to the car and looked in? He had a fully loaded Glock with about 22 magazines. He had the gun in the doorway, in the door. And he said, I would have shot and killed him and carried on. And that guy, we never identified who that guy was, but somewhere walking around is a guy who could have been murdered for just doing his job, taking the trash out. Turned around, walked away. This guy kept getting back dressed. So he goes to that back door, says he looks in the crack. He waits a couple seconds. And, you know, the people that are in there remember a big guy standing up during the previews for Superman, a big guy, and it turns out his name was Sullivan. And he stands up and goes, yeah, he's so excited. They remember other things about the previews. They remember the movie getting to the part where it's Catwoman who's just stolen the jewels from Batman. Do you remember the movie at all? He decides to go in, and he pushes the door open, and he starts with the shotgun. He knows he's going to dump it when it's empty because it's too hard to load, and he goes 6 rounds. Kaboom. After throwing the tear gas. Kaboom, 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 kaboom. He kills 3 with the shotgun, injures probably a dozen more. And then he goes to the AR-15 style assault rifle. This thing's a semi-automatic, and it has that 100-round drum on it. And any of these guys, these professional law enforcement military guys will tell you that thing is a piece of crap, and you shouldn't use it. That's why they don't use it. That's for like video games and stuff. But he's got it overfilled. And he pulls the trigger once, twice, 65 times that thing fires. And that's that thump, 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 thump you hear in that audio. And he's shooting people all over the theater. After 65 trigger pulls, it jams. Now here's the thing. This guy spent 5 different times getting in his car and driving 2 hours west on I-70 to go to a shooting range that he thought was really poorly monitored at best. And at those ranges, each of those times, he practiced shooting with the AR-15 style weapon, with the shotgun, and with both of the Glocks. And he would later say he practiced shooting standing, kneeling, prone, moving to the left, moving to the right. He practiced changing out the magazines, but you know what he never practiced? How to clear a jam, because he didn't know. And thank God, because this thing jams, and he dumps it, and he tries to grab a 40-round magazine and seat it inside. If you don't know weapons, you don't know what I'm talking about, but it locks in place unless there's a round jammed in there. And there's a witness that we had on the stand who was sitting in that part, you know, where you walk to go get the popcorn and stuff underneath there? There's a seat above there, and she's looking over the railing, and she can see him in his helmet and stuff going under that light. And he's fiddling around with the weapon, but he can't clear it. So he puts one in, throws it down, grabs another one, sticks it in. He can't get it to seat. That's those magazines you see kicked down the hallway there. And he decides to abandon it. He puts and it's slung on him. He puts the AR-15 down, goes to the Glock 40 caliber, fires 5 more rounds as he starts to walk out of the theater. One of them goes through the side and kills a 51-year-old man named Gordon Cowden. Gordon, father of 3 daughters, 2 of them were with him in the theater when he gets shot through and through with that 40 cal. And then he goes outside, and that's when he has that revelation. I'm not going to get away, right? If that weapon doesn't jam, if he knows how to clear that jam, my belief is hundreds more die. He's going to keep working his way around the theater. He's got plenty of ammo left, and he's going to keep going. But that's it. His main kill weapon is gone, and he doesn't get a chance to use it. Finally, the last thing is heroes. Okay, the diversion didn't work. That was huge. But when Aurora PD gets there, and by the way, the firemen and women get there, and the buses, the ambulances, but they can't get into that back parking lot of the theater. There's so much craziness, and between that and the landscaping and the rocks and all, they can't get there. So the Aurora PD guys that are coming, they just start to go over the landscaping and drive down in there. And they get inside, and they see all these people out in the parking lot, in the theater. They're dragging people out. There's a woman named Farah Soudani. Farah Soudani is eviscerated by her injuries. I mean, her insides are on her outside. They put her together and hold her together and take her. There's no ambulance now, and they decide, screw it. We're just going to put people in the back of the cars, and we're going to take off for hospitals. And there was like 3, I think, that they ended up driving to until they overloaded them, and then they'd go to another one, and then they'd go to another one. And they would drop them off, they'd turn around and come back. Another piece of evidence the court never let us get in because of the prejudicial value was that one of the guys driving around said, I could hear a sloshing noise in the back, in the footwell. It was blood, from all the blood from these people. They would talk to them while they were in the back. They'd have one victim trying to keep another victim from going unconscious. I don't have any doubt in my mind that but for those men and women, we have many, many more dead people. Farah Soudani to this day, if you didn't see the scar, and if you did, it's inappropriate because it's right here, but you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know she'd ever been injured. They saved lives. Dozens and dozens and dozens of lives. So what should have been a massacre of hundreds ended up mercifully, and that's such a hard word to say, being the murder of 12 and the attempted murder of another 70. That's a bit miraculous too. I think that may be closing argument or opening right there. And this was how, this is a picture of Veronica. This is how we ended the case, was to have her picture up there as a reminder. The jury came back on guilt very quickly. They rejected insanity very quickly. And then we went into, it doesn't have to be 3 phases, but this is the way Judge Samora wanted to do it. And frankly, the guy's smarter than I am. I'm not going to argue with him. We had to prove aggravation beyond a reasonable doubt. Those 5 things I talked about, the jury came back and they found 4 of them true. They did not find first-degree murder of Veronica as an aggravator because it's a different kind of murder. It's you have to intend to kill someone under 12, as opposed to you went in intending to kill people and you killed someone who was 12. That's different. So we got 4 of the aggravators. We needed 1 to move on. We got 4. And then we went into mitigation, and that was the big dog and pony show from the defense, where they brought out everyone that had ever had anything nice to say about this guy. And they did. People came out and they remembered him. He was so sweet and so smart, and he was the Renaissance child, and he loved puppies and all that sort of stuff. 2.5 hours. That's how long it took the jury to come back and say, no, the aggravation outweighs mitigation beyond a reasonable doubt. Boom. So now we're in that last phase. And that last phase is like nothing else. You get jury instructions, but it isn't about the law, and it isn't about facts. 10 times the judge instructs the jurors, this is a matter of individual, reasoned, moral judgment. Those are big words. Undefined, big words. And one of the instructions actually says, this may be the most important decision you may ever make. And it puts a ton of weight on these people. And it says, you should be free from intimidation. You don't have to agree with everyone else. No decision you've made up to this point has to be part of this decision. I mean, it's kind of really open-ended. It's what you think of it. So the jurors went back. And here's what's happened since, and I'll tell you how we know then all this other stuff I'm going to talk about is since then, I put out feelers before the verdict came back with the judge. I said, would you tell them, I don't want to reach out to them. I want, no matter what the outcome is, I want them to feel comfortable coming to us. I want to know what they went through, what they saw, what they liked, didn't like, where the hang-up was. And so since this thing has ended, we have talked with almost all of the deliberating jurors, with the exception of the holdout, and 2, I'll describe to you, were 8 out of 10s. And then we've talked, I think, all the alternates. There's maybe one alternate we haven't talked to, the lady with the walker. But other than that, we've talked to just about everybody. And they all tell the same story. They say, the guy wasn't insane. And it wasn't even close for us. Some of the jurors actually said, not only did I not think he was insane, I thought he was faking any mental illness. I didn't even say that. The guy's got something wrong with him. There's no doubt. You can't plan to murder 400 people and not have something wrong with you. But that ain't insanity. That's one thing they told us. The other thing they told us was, I said, look, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. I said, what evidence would you have wanted that you didn't get? And they said, nothing. Nothing. I mean, this was clear. I said, well, what happened in the voting? And they said, well, after that first day, we gave it to them about 3:45 on the 6th. And so they did some initial deliberation until about 4:30. And so we took an initial vote, and the foreperson asked, look, scale of 1 to 10, where is everybody? Presuming everybody was at some level for death. And they had 10 out of 10s, and 2 8 out of 10s. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to get this done. Let's just go home for the night. We'll come back. And they did. They come back the next day, and they keep deliberating. And at one point, they do a revote. They go, let's just check and see where everybody is. And by the way, everyone we've talked to said the same thing. The 2 8 out of 10s, they felt like they were always going to end up at death. They just wanted to keep deliberating, asking questions, talking about this. They needed to get right with this outcome. But they didn't have any doubts. And all of a sudden, one woman says, I need to clarify something. When I said 10 out of 10 yesterday, I mean I'm a 10 out of 10 for life. And I could never vote for death in this case. And with that in the air, everyone just said, that's it. Now, at the end of phase 2, that's that aggravation mitigation thing, that's where I thought we would lose. After they put on all of this woe is me stuff, and the mom and the dad, and by the way, the dad was not compelling, mom was compelling. I mean, it's mom talking about her son who we're trying to put I mean, that's some important stuff. I said, if you have any doubts at all about what the right thing to do here is, I want you to go back and ask the judge to give you the video of the crime scene. And there was about God, I can't remember how long it was now, 30, 40-minute video, total silence of a camera walking around the theater with those 10 dead people in it. And it is awful. I mean, it is awful. And I knew, man, that no one would want to see that if they didn't have to look at it. And sure enough, we get through the second phase in 2.5 hours, no one asked to see it. But now, on Friday the 7th, they asked to see the video. And people started asking me, what, is that a good sign? Don't you think it's a good sign? I'm like, I don't. Nobody would want to see that video unless they're on the fence or they're trying to convince someone who's on the fence. So they convinced her to watch the video, and she said, I'm not changing my vote. I'm not changing my vote. They came outside, and that's how it went down. So one clarification that's frustrating for me. To read it in the press when they say the jury voted for life, or the jury did not vote for life. It was a function of law because they could not be unanimous on death. That's what happened. So that's it. That's how it ended. And it was kind of sudden. But what I promised before and during the trial when media would ask, hey, can you answer questions? But I said, no, I can't. But when this is over, I promise I will go anywhere that will have me with members of the public to talk about this case and answer any and every question that they have about it, because it's important, okay? Colorado has a death penalty, but we ain't Texas, and we're not Georgia, and we're not Kentucky or Florida. We use it sparingly, but when we use it, I think we should have a conversation about it every time we do it. Is this something we want to continue? Is this still the right thing to do? Should Colorado change? I think that's important.